You wake in the dark, chest heaving, sweat beading on your brow. Outside, the wind whistles through the hollow wood of your New England farmhouse. Inside, the candle flickers and your fingers are drawn to your throat, where the cough jarred you awake again. Your sister lies upstairs in the parlor, wasting away. You can smell it in the air, something faint, metallic, the reek of long illness. She whispers that she can't breathe, that the color has drained from her cheeks, that the warmth of life is slipping. But in the shadow beyond the candle circle, there's something else, a suspicion creeping through the corn-brambled fields, through the rock fences and the graveyard tombstones. They say the dead do not always rest, that perhaps your sister or your mother lies in the earth, yet still walks in the marrow of your bones, stealing life from the living. And so begins our story. It is mid-19th century New England, thin soil, stubborn rock, subsistence farms scattered across hills and low valleys. The winters are harsh, the summers brief. On a fog-damp morning in Vermont or Rhode Island, the dead are not always dead. At least that's what the desperate believe. For decades, the region has been haunted not just by death, but by a terror with no name. The cause is called consumption, a slow wasting disease, a cough that won't quit. Night sweats and blood-tinged sputum, and the body drawn so thin that you could pass a hand between ribs. By the time the victim's face is sunk in, eyes hollow, the neighbors are murmuring. Why should one family lose multiple members year after year? Why should the brother now cough? Why should the mother's strength fade while the daughter perishes? Diseases like tuberculosis have come and gone, the why unknown, and so the mind leaps. You see the young girl dying, the brother left behind, the father helpless. You see a family in ruins. And you ask, what if the dead among us are not resting? What if the deceased are still drawing life? This is the panic, a terror born not of Gothic castles and Eastern Europe, but of New England graveyards and rural houses on New England stone. They believed that the dead may feed on their survivors, not physically rising from the grave with fangs, but by draining the living through a shared illness, past unseen. Picture one such household. The father is a modest farmer, stone fences hemming his little fields, a small house with a lean-to attached, a woodpile beside the barn. His wife, once hale and cheerful, is now gaunt, the cough tearing her nights. She dies. The daughter grows sick next, then the son. They cannot afford to move west, the railroad's slow to reach this far. The climate changes, the land is poor, they stay. Each name etched into their gravestones becomes a stone of grief. Friends and neighbors whisper, one of your dead might be behind this. You do not yet call them vampires in the sense of blood-sucking revenants, but the living fear that in the grave lies someone still feeding. The corpse that should decay has instead stayed too fresh. The heart still holds fluid. The flesh, under the soil's frozen hush, hasn't collapsed. That odd corpse, they believe, is the culprit. It is possible that the dead are not yet dead. So the community stirs. It exhumes the body, it turns it, it opens the coffin, it examines the heart. If there is still fluid, if the nails have grown, if the body seems preserved, or even just too fresh in someone's eye, that body may be judged undead. The grave becomes a site of judgment, the coffin the courtroom. And the remedy is dreadful. The heart may be removed, it may be burned on a stone, the ashes may be mixed with water and given to the sick to drink. In rarer cases, the head may be severed, the bones scrambled, the corpse reburied beneath threshold stones or with rocks upon its chest. These are not tales of West Slavic vampires climbing at night. They are a hyper-local folklore born of desperation and disease. We thought our sister was draining our brother, one distressed family might say. The scholarly folklorist Michael E. Bell found dozens of such exhumations across New England. In one New Hampshire town, for example, a doctor reported seeing a body dug up where the heart was burned on a stone, the ashes given to the sick. Let us travel to one of the most harrowing documented cases, the family of Mercy Lena Brown in the town of Exeter, Rhode Island. It is January of 1892. The Brown family farm sits on rocky ground on the edge of town. They have already been devastated by consumption. The mother, Mary Eliza Brown, died in 1883. A daughter, Mary Olive Brown, followed in 1884. Years pass. The land is poor, the hope small. Then Mercy becomes ill. Her older brother, Edwin, is living away in hopes of better health, but comes home when he weakens. Mercy is 19, bright, a young woman with promise. But the disease takes hold. By the time she dies on January 17, 1892, the community is on edge. They watch Edwin growing thinner. They fear for him. The neighbors murmur, "There must be something more than disease." Against his instinct, the father, George Brown, reluctantly agrees to allow an exhumation of the coffin of Mercy and her sister and mother on March 17, 1892. When Mary Eliza's remains are opened, they show advanced decay, nothing unusual. When Mary Olive's coffin is opened, same. But Mercy's? Her body appears surprisingly intact, no offensive odor, flesh still in place and, according to the account, liquid behind the heart and lungs. The conclusion, Mercy is the undead. She is draining her living brother, so the heart and liver are removed, carried to a nearby rock, burned. The ashes drop into water and a teaspoon of the mixture is given to Edwin to drink. The rationale: ingesting the ashes of the vampire will arrest her attack and give the living a chance to recover. But within months, Edwin himself dies. The ritual fails. The panic subsides slowly, but the horror lingers. In the immediate moment, the ritual is gruesome and desperate. Neighbors gather. The graveyard lids are pried open. Musk of earth and rot drifts in the early spring air. Even the exhuming men keep cloth over their mouths. The crackle of the fire on the stone, the smell of burning flesh, the father's tears. The family stands by as stranger townsfolk. Local doctor, newspaper reporter watch the bones turn white in flame. Then ashes in cups for the dying. It is medieval in its ritual, yet it happens in 1892 America, in a republic of railroads, telegraph wires, and newspapers. But to understand this horror, we must step back further into history. In the 1730s, rural New England begins to encounter what will be named consumption, the slow wasting away of body and life. At that time, the cause is unknown. Bacteria are invisible, germs unimagined. The disease can hug families across years, hitting one member after another: the cough, the fever, the hollow eyes. Writers of the time described the consumptive as a pale eater of his own flesh, the forehead covered with drops of sweat, the cheeks painted with a livid crimson, the eyes sunk, the breath offensive, quick and laborious. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, consumption is the dominant cause of death in the region, accounting for perhaps 1/4 of all deaths by 1800. The doctors are helpless. The scientists' microscopes are not yet turning to mycobacterium. The public remains ignorant. Superstition fills the gap. Families watching sibling after sibling die grow desperate. Something must be causing this, they say. The rational mind flounders. They grasp at folklore. And so the belief emerges that one dead who should stay buried may instead prey on the living. A body which hasn't decomposed, a corpse which still holds blood, a coffin whose tenant is too fresh. In some cases, the corpse had been placed in above-ground crypts during winter freeze. When spring thaw comes, the body may look preserved, and local people conclude, vampire. The rituals that follow vary, turning the corpse in the grave, inserting a rock or stake, burning the heart, feeding the ashes, rearranging femurs across the chest, decapitating. In his anthropological paper, Michael E. Bell documents more than a dozen cases with bioarchaeological evidence, bones rearranged, hearths of burning hearts, that correspond to documented folklore of vampires in New England. What's crucial here is not the theatrics, it's the context. Isolated farms, scattered populations, harsh winters, limited communication, minimal medical care, high mortality. A family losing member after member lives in a world where the dead and the living brush close. The boundary between them is thin. In these communities, the dead body itself becomes a suspect. The grave becomes crime scene, the body, the instrument of death. The exhumation is the intervention, the ritual is the therapy. If the family can identify the culprit corpse, they might force it back into the earth and thus halt the dying. That's the hope. Yet even as these fires burn on cemetery rocks, the scientific world advances. In 1882, Robert Koch identifies the tuberculosis bacillus, but the news moves slowly to rural New England farms. Treatment remains scant. Antibiotics are decades away. So while some in the cities may know better, the countryside still reaches for ritual and belief. To the people of 19th century rural New England, the corpse of Mercy Brown, the ashes of her heart, might seem more tangible than an invisible bacterium. The community's measure of control is ritual. The burning rock is an act. Zoom back beyond Rhode Island to Vermont, to eastern Connecticut, to southern Massachusetts. In Bennington County, Vermont, 1790, one Rachel Harris dies of consumption. Her widowed husband, Isaac Burton, remarries her stepsister Huldah. Soon, Huldah falls ill too. Neighbors whisper, perhaps Rachel is causing Huldah's decline from the grave. Burton agrees to exhume Rachel's body, find evidence of undeath. The ritual occurs, yet Huldah dies anyway. The panic spreads. These cases were not isolated curiosities. They were regular enough for a folklorist to find nearly 100 exhumations across the region. Not every case full of horror leaves a record. Many passed into local memory and oral tradition. And so we hover in that liminal space between folklore and medicine, between ritual and desperation. Imagine you are a young mother in 1830s Vermont. You have seen your husband fade away, your 2 children cough at night. You leave the candle burning in the parlor so you can hear the first gasp. You know nothing of bacteria. You know only that the dead brother-in-law rests in the cold crib, yet your own daughter's life slips through your fingers. The neighbors suggest maybe the dead are feeding you. Maybe exhumation is the only path. You decide you will dig up his body. You don't tell your other children. At midnight, you tiptoe into the cold churchyard. You pry open the coffin. The body lies odd, silken yet rigid, hair long, nails grown. The heart is firm. You have no words. You take a stone, place upon his chest. You turn the body. You might burn the heart later. These rites are heavier than death. In many ways, this panic is a mirror of fear. It resembles the earlier spectral hunts of witchcraft in New England, villagers looking to the invisible for a culprit, seeking salvation through ritual when science lacks answers. But unlike witches, these vampires were never quite branded as undead revenants rising at night and biting wandering travelers. The term vampire was often applied later by newspapers or outsiders. Locally, the dead were more often called the Trouble or the Strange Death. Return to March of 1892 in Exeter, Rhode Island. The brown farm quiet under a pale spring sun. The graveyard has been opened, Mercy's remains handled. The heart burned on a stone that morning sends a curl of grey smoke into the chill air. The father watches, the mother gone. Edwin clings to life. The town holds its breath. It does not work. Edwin dies in May. The community's faith in the ritual falters. The newspaper prints the story with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. In exhumation to arrest the fatal disease, some families conducted macabre excavations. Yet the belief lingers. Into the early 20th century, in some remote towns, families still whispered, "We must check the grave." In one mid-19th century Connecticut burial, when the body was exhumed decades later, Archaeologists found bones rearranged, femurs crossed over the chest, evidence of the folk belief that the dead was kept pinned. The panic gradually waned as medicine progressed, sanatoria, germ theory, antibiotics. But it remains a chilling footnote to American history, a moment when fear of the unseen led to the exhuming of the dead. Let's pause and listen to the clay-cold wind blow across the cemetery. Imagine a local newspaper editor in 1896 writing to his readers, "The old superstition of the New England vampire may be humble compared to old-world legends, but the struggle of these rural families, bending beneath a relentless disease, deserves more sympathy than sneer." In that sense, this panic teaches us more than just macabre details. It teaches about how communities respond to terror and death, how folklore fills the gaps when the body wastes and the mind cannot fathom why, how families in utter desperation reach into the grave to haul out the corpse and demand accountability, how illness, death, fear, and ritual interweave. As the decades pass, you'll find the graves of those suspected vampires in New England, the names etched on slate: Brown, Harris, others lost to consumption. The markers date to the 1800s. Over time, the stone and moss cover the family plots. The fire smoke of the burning hearts fades into legend. But what if you walked into one of those cemeteries now? On a grey afternoon by the old chestnut tree in Exeter, you might pass the stone that marks the Brown family plot. The air still holds a whisper. "We did it. We tried." The wind sighs over rocky soil, and you think of Mercy's remains, the burnt ashes, the failing cure, the ritual that couldn't save the living. Because the cause was not supernatural at all, but a bacterium unseen, a science not yet real. The panic stands as a bridge between the rational and the irrational, the living and the dead. It reminds us that terror does not wait for modernity. Even in the age of telegraphs and steam engines, belief could outpace science. Even in America, the land of progress, the dead were blamed for the living's decay. In closing, let's reflect. The panic was not about cinematic vampires. It was about families broken by disease. It was about the living demanding answers when there were none. It was about the corpse in the ground, the heart that still appeared fresh, the ashes in a cup. And for a moment, the panic pulled back the veil between life and death and asked, who is feeding whom? So when you walk past a quiet graveyard in New England and the wind rustles in the rocks, remember, there was a time when the living thought their dead might rise, not in fangs and capes, but in the silent drain of breath, the hollow cough, the wasting body. And they tried to stop it with fire, with ashes, with ritual. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of history.